Can we begin? Wonderful. Thank you all for coming here for our press conference. We are going to talk today a lot about water science, about water quality, and about what that means for Olympic events and for racing and for swimming and for recreational waters. And we believe we have some important announcements to make, which I think you'll find interesting, and I hope so. We have been working on the Seine River since 2016, when we developed our very first instrument that was able to measure automatically E. coli and enterococci in the river directly. And it is this instrument here, this is our first prototype that was able to automatically measure this, and it was used by the city of Paris. We have worked with the wastewater authority of the city, which is called CIAP, and then we have continued to work with the City Hall of Paris for several years, measuring the water quality at multiple locations along the Seine River, at locations that were potential future bathing water sites, recreational sites, or potentially Olympic sites. So we have worked with the City of Paris for a number of years, and we continue to work with them because we're monitoring every single day the swimming site that's open at La Villette, which is in the canal that comes off from the Seine towards Bastille, and where Parisians are swimming every day. And we're making 6 measurements a day of different types of bacteria that we're sending the data to the city, and they decide whether to open or not the swimming site. For the Seine River, this year is particular. The reason is that we have decided to have our own sampling campaign, and we're doing sampling every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, in order to be able to measure the water quality in the Seine. And we have done this last year as well, and we've collected a lot of data, and there is a lot of insight that comes out of this data that allows us today to make some statements that are extremely important in terms of water quality. And this doesn't only affect the Paris Olympics, this affects the water quality regulations worldwide. And I think at the end of this presentation, you will all understand why and why I've called you here. So thank you very much for coming here, and hopefully you'll enjoy this journey into water science. How do we make measurements today? How do laboratories measure water quality? Well, it involves a number of steps. First, you send someone who drives to the sampling site, and he needs to collect a sample. And then this sample is put in a cooler where it's stored on ice and then transported to a laboratory. This may take 1 hour, 2 hours, and today in Paris, when you have so many restrictions, it may take 5 hours to reach a lab. Then you need to sign paperwork and do chain of custody transfer of the sample to the lab. Then the lab takes it and usually puts it in a fridge and stores it there for a while. And then they take it out and they run a protocol. The most common protocol used in France and used for the Olympics as well is what we call the most probable number method. And I'm going to explain to you how that works. And then the lab reads the results. It needs 18 hours from the moment where they start the incubation and until they get the results. Then they read the results, and then they actually have a number. But not only do they have a number, but if they actually do their work correctly, they also have something that we call confidence intervals, which is the potential error or uncertainty, because it's not an error necessarily, but there is uncertainty intrinsic to the method. And this is something that needs to be reported, and it's very rarely reported. Because if you are at 899 bacteria, but with a confidence intervals that goes from 300 to 1700, it's very different than, being at 50 bacteria with the confidence intervals from 30 to 100. All these steps that I described are shown here. So you need the answer today. You need to know what the water quality is now. You have to go through this whole chain, and then your result really comes in 24 hours if you're lucky, or maybe in 72 hours, sometimes in 2 to 3 weeks. This is obviously not a good thing when you care about the public safety, when you care about the public health, because you only have the result many days later. So you find out after the fact that water quality was not good, or maybe it was good, but you only find out after the fact and many days after the fact. Today in Paris, these measurements are made really, really fast. It's probably the fastest you can do, but still with the fastest current laboratory method that is accepted by the current regulations, you require a minimum of 18 hours. So the decisions made today on whether to hold an event or whether to open a swim site are based on data that is at least 18 hours old. And I'm going to show you today that that is a very long time when we're talking about rapid meteorological events, rain events, storm events, sewer overflows. Water quality can change drastically and very quickly. So where do we fall in? Why did we develop these technologies that you see over here? These are rapid technologies, and what they do is they allow you to do measurements directly in the river at the site and obtain results very quickly within a few hours rather than within 2 days, 3 days. And the way they work, I'm going to explain you the way they work, and what's more important is that they do the measurement in a different way from the standard measurement, in a different way that's fundamentally important, because they provide a lot of information that the laboratory cannot provide today, and that is extremely important from a risk assessment perspective, as you will see in a minute. So our instruments, they are connected, what we call IoT connected. IoT stands for Internet of Things. Means that all these devices have a little SIM card inside. So you can control them remotely and you get the data remotely. So this allows you to get reporting right away. You don't need to have people looking at the data. They automate the whole process. So you can go on site and have a device and remotely send a command. It takes a sample and it starts analyzing it right away. And data starts streaming, so within hours you have results. You have results and you can issue automatic alerts, and that's also really, really important. But we also have portable devices that you can carry with you, and you can do a manual sample, you collect it, you put it in the device, and then the device automates the whole measurement process. So during the opening ceremony, the four of us were out there carrying a couple of these devices, and we measured throughout the opening ceremony. During that time, nobody could travel, nobody could get in and out, no sample could be analyzed except for ours, because we had this portable technology. And finally, we also have this device, which is handheld. So it can be used anywhere in the world, and it's actually currently being used in places in the developing world which don't have access to drinking water. And for them, it's not a matter of getting a diarrhea or maybe a skin rash or conjunctivitis. It is a matter of life and death to have good water. So it's extremely important to have these automated methods, and this is our business. What I'm showing you here is a metaphor. And probably you're wondering, what the hell is he doing? Well, I'm telling you, I'm asking you to count, this is a big city and this is a street. And you need to know how many people are coming down this intersection. How do you count that? Well, I see a person here, a person there, a person there, a person there. I see a car here. Well, is it just a driver? Is it the driver and 2 passengers? Is it this bus? Does it have only the driver, or is it filled with 50 people? If you had a train there which can carry 1,000 people, is it empty or not? Well, this kind of helicopter view is what the lab sees today. What they need to count are these individuals, how many there are inside the cars or walking. But they don't see inside the cars and they don't see inside the buses. And this is where our method, and I'm going to explain to you why in a second, is different. Because our method is a policeman placed here that stops every single car, looks inside, sees how many people there are, writes it down, and then goes to the bus, and then goes, sees a passenger, etc. So this is a fundamental difference and a fundamental limitation of the current laboratory method, which makes risk assessment difficult currently with the standard methods, and sometimes they can greatly undercount the total number of E. coli bacteria in a sample because of this reason. So what I'm showing here, what I'm showing here is what we called a most probable number plate. This is the fastest method that can be done in the laboratory today to measure E. coli. And the way it works is that you take 100 milliliters of water you put it inside this bag and then you seal it so that you have little volumes of water that are independent from each other. You know, these wells, we call them, and you have big wells and small wells. And then you mix the water actually before putting it in. You mix it with a reagent which will develop fluorescence over time if there are E. coli there. So after 18 hours, if a well has fluorescence in it, it means that there was one E. coli bacterium in it, at least one, because this could be one pedestrian, or it could be a car, or it could be a bus. It could be a particle, which is a fecal particle, which can carry hundreds of E. coli, and which is much more dangerous, actually, than a single E. coli, or the pathogens that these stand for. So the way the standard lab method works, it looks at which of these wells have turned fluorescent. So all of these big wells are fluorescent. They're bigger, so probability to hold the bacterium is bigger. So they're all lit, right? They're all on. And then some of these small ones, they are fluorescent as well. Not all of them, you know, these are not fluorescent. So based on these two numbers of small wells and big wells, you go to a reference table and you get a value. And it will tell you it is 724 E. coli. And then you get a confidence interval, and it tells you, well, what this really means is that with 95% confidence, the value is between 250 and 1600. Okay? Well, the way our method works is that we analyze, actually those are samples being analyzed. These are samples, and we'll see results from some of those samples. You analyze the whole sample. You don't separate it into little wells. And we incubate the whole sample, and we look at the fluorescence production over time from the whole sample. So every single bacterium in this sample, whether it is on an aggregate, whether it is a bus, a car, or a pedestrian, they will produce signal. So we see all that signal, we add it up, and this is how we can measure what we call the comprehensive count.
Was that water from the Seine?
No, those are all water samples from the Seine, yes. And what we do, what we obtain actually is a curve that looks like this. We see basically nothing happening for a number of hours, and then at some point we see this fluorescence go up sharply, and we detect this increase. And the time it takes from the moment we put the sample in, it's being incubated in this medium, and until we see the sharp increase in fluorescence is related to the total number of E. coli. If you only have a few E. coli, it will take a long time because the E. coli need to divide. And then they produce more fluorescence, and then they divide again. So you have 1, then you have 2, you have 4, you have 8, you have an exponential increase. But if you have many of them, you need fewer division cycles to reach this level of fluorescence, whereas if you have only one, it's more division cycles. So the time from when you start the sample to here is actually what is related to the water quality, and this is how we count the bacteria. And we get a very accurate count, and this counts all the bacteria in the sample, whether they're on aggregates or not. These are pictures actually taken. You'll recognize where they're taken and when, and same thing here. So what I want to show you here is how actually these methods differ and how the standard method is actually limiting in what it sees. So this is a sample here. This is actually a microscopy image taken with our microscope. It's a fluorescence image. You see free bacteria. This is how a normal sample should look. This is how the lab thinks the samples look like. And this is what they're set up to count, these E. coli. But once in a while, you see something like this. And this is a fecal particle. So you have many bacteria together, but not only bacteria, you have other pathogens. You have viruses, you have, protozoa, other things. So this is what can really get you sick. So this is an infectious vector that is much stronger than individual bacteria or free-floating viruses, because this is protected. This could be fecal matter that has been protected from the actual source, which is a sewer overflow, right? So this is raw sewage getting into the river, and then it degrades it, decomposes it into smaller and smaller particles, and at some point it comes to this size, and then it doesn't break down so easily anymore because it's small enough and it stays up in suspension. And when you have sediment at the bottom of the river, well, it gets resuspended. So you have particles like this that normally would sediment, but because you have a lot of flow and because you have a lot of boats going by, well, it goes back up in suspension. So the laboratory method, you know, these are the wells I was talking about, and these are wells which contain a single bacterium. This is a well that contains many bacteria. And what you see, the fluorescence result at the end is this. So this well looks the same as this well, but this well actually contains a lot more E. coli. So how does this matter? Why is it important? And this is extremely important because this actually signifies that the current methods can undercount bacteria significantly. In this case, you have 5 free bacteria and you have 2 aggregates. So the laboratory that counts, you know, a bus as a single unit will count this as 7. That's the lab count. If you count all the bacteria here, well, these carry 4 plus 5, that's 13. So you have a factor of 2 difference between the comprehensive count and what we call the laboratory count here. But we can do something smart here. We can actually take this sample and put it through a filter that will allow the small bacteria to go through, but would retain the big aggregates. In this case, these bacteria will end up in the final filtrate, but not these big aggregates. And this is what we call the planktonic count. These are single bacteria or maybe 2 bacteria together. And we obtain this by doing a 5-micron filtration. An E. coli bacterium is 2 microns long by half a micron wide on average. So it will go through this filter. But the aggregates larger than 5 microns will not. So why are these important? Because we can measure both the lab count, the comprehensive count, and the planktonic count. And I'm going to show you the data from the Olympic site in a minute. So the reason why this is really important is that the current laboratory methods are blind to this. They don't see them. And we can see them today. So we can actually have more accurate risk assessment and better chances to make sure that athletes competing are safe and they will not get sick, or that people like you and me that want to go swim in the Seine next year will be safe. And currently, the risk indication of these stealth aggregate-bound bacterial charges are unknown. But they're likely to be extremely significant because these aggregates protect their content. They are vectors that will transmit the viruses and pathogens all the way to you. So this is breaking ground research. This was just published today on bioRxiv. This is the paper. It's called Addressing Underestimation of Waterborne Disease Risk Due to Fecal Indicator Bacteria Bound in Aggregates. It just came out, and you can get it by following this link. It is available for public view and public review. This is going to be published in a peer-reviewed paper, but we thought it was fundamental for this work to come out right now because we see major discrepancies between laboratory data and comprehensive bacterial counts that are measured in the Seine River. And we are in that gray zone where nobody actually knows what the risk is. And this is where we are today. So now we're going to look at some live data from the 2024 Olympics. And before that, what I would like to do is show you some pictures. So the protagonists here are, Mateusz, please raise your hand. Right there, sampling this morning during the triathlon events. Right here, you have this guy doing measurements this morning as well, and it's finishing the measurements right now. So this is live data you're going to see coming from this machine that measures online. And this is our team during the opening ceremony. So you have Emily, raise your hand, Omar, myself, and Mateusz. And this is also a teamwork with all the people that support this, that develop the technology, that develop the communications, that develop the electronics. So I will name here David, Patrick, Kai, I will name Karine, who helps us get it all together. So this is really a lot of good work done by a small team, but really dedicated and with the latest water quality instrumentation. I'm going to move on now to a live presentation, and, well, hopefully, there you go, actually. Sorry, I think I will need to, Okay, so let's go down a little bit. This is the website that I've sent to all of you that was in the invitation email. This is where we publish our Olympic data live. And if you go a little bit further down, this is the data from our Olympic triathlon effort. And you're going to see that we have measured this basically every single day, multiple times a day. And if you go at the bottom, we have a sort of blog here. So just there, please. So on July 29th, remember we had a big rain event just, on the 26th during the opening ceremony, and the E. coli level spiked the next day. And then we wanted to see how long it would take for these E. coli level to go down. And what we have seen there is that we were measuring bacteria levels that were, between 1,400 and 2,000 as planktonic count. This is also very close to what the laboratory measures. And if you looked at the comprehensive count, they're actually close to 5,000. So that means you have a factor of 3 right there. So what is the risk? Is it this one where I don't see everything else, or is it this one where I count everything? And we think that this is the real risk. Or it should be used as the risk measure, but perhaps with different thresholds. What we're saying is that the current regulations, they're actually blind to this distinction, and this is a huge error, and it can lead to putting people at risk. So the next thing I would like to show, if we go down, please. Keep going, keep going, keep going. So right here. This is during the 2024 Olympic opening ceremony. So you have seen we have sampled early in the morning, then around, early afternoon, and then throughout the ceremony, just before, at the opening, and then an hour later. And remember that in the morning it wasn't raining, and the E. coli counts were relatively high. Even the planktonic counts were at 980, 1,019, and the comprehensive counts were at close to 1,400. But then during the ceremony, something that sounds like magic happened. Planktonic E. coli levels actually went down significantly. They went down to levels of 139, 39, 243, whereas the comprehensive E. coli stayed up. So what is happening there? And this is where it's getting interesting, because this is really new water science. When you have rain coming, this water is clean, so it dilutes the top layer of the river. So all these planktonic bacteria will go down. But at the same time, you have a lot of boat action, and the river is flowing. So the sediment particles, which are representing this comprehensive count, they actually come up. So they're present there. It's just that when you do the lab measurement or when you do the planktonic count, you don't see them. So we're going now down to the further down, please. Please, let's. So here, right here, I want to show you this graph, because this is all our data from beginning of April and until now, and it's updated multiple times a day. So every single new result, and soon the results that we're going to look at live that come from samples taken this morning are shown here. And this is a complicated graph, so I'm going to break it down for you. What you see here at these blue lines, this is precipitation. These are rain events. It's daily precipitation on any specific day. So you see we had some pretty big storms here during the month of May, and they created pretty big bacterial peaks. And then we had a storm here. This is about 2 weeks ago, and this is the storm during the event. And you see that after the storm, you always have a peak of bacteria. Let's go down. You actually see this much better if you actually project the number of bacteria, you present them on a logarithmic scale. So 3 means 10 to the power 3, meaning 1,000, 4 means 10,000, and 2 means 100. So you see much more clearly that every rain event here is creating a peak. But we see something else. What we see here is that all the data is around 3.5 and 4 up to this moment, and then about, in a few data points, it drops down, and now it is around 3 and 3.5. So what has happened? What has happened here actually is that the Austerlitz basin was opened for the first time and allowed to fill. So from this moment on, it is operational. Up to here, we see business as usual, as it was before this big infrastructure project was built. So what we see is actually a pretty drastic increase in water quality. We see that here, basically up to up to this point, we have absolutely no single point, whether it's planktonic measurement, comprehensive measurement, or lab measurement, that is below the 1,000 level of the triathlon. We're starting here, a lot of the data points are. So something magic happened there. It's not magic. It is, on one hand, infrastructure. On the other hand, it is good weather. It became sunnier. We started to go into the summer season. The rain flow, the river discharge decreased, so there was less water, less, flowing a little bit slower, less sediment that's being resuspended. So all of these factors explain what we see here. But what is important is that even after this, we still have two big events here, rain events, and both of them have created an overflow of the basin. Well, this is in a way to be expected. You cannot build infrastructure to be able to resist to everything. There is a limit. There is a maximum volume that you can capture. And in these two cases, which also happen to be the two biggest rain events over this whole period, which just happened right now, this is a little bit of bad luck. But what you see is that it overcame the capacity of this basin, and possibly there was also a lot of pollution coming from upstream. So we're studying that as well. We're measuring the water quality upstream on the Seine River, on the Marne River. You've noticed that right here we're in a strategic position. If you walk 2 minutes that way, you're stepping into the Seine, and 2 minutes that way, you're stepping into the Marne. So right here is where the confluence is. So we can sample both of those, and then we can sample down in Paris as well. So I'd like to show you something else. We're also doing, you may ask yourself, well, where does all this, E. coli, where do they come from? Do they really come from sewage? Maybe they come from, from animals, from the streets being cleaned by the rain and taking the dog poop, or, well, not really, because what we measure here actually is, can we go down, please? This is what we call HF183. This is a human marker. This is something that only exists in the human gut. And we see the same, essentially exactly the same trends as for E. coli. So actually, this is human sewage that is going into the river. We have confirmation of that. Let's keep going down. And further, like that. What I want to show here, this is the latest 3 weeks of data, a little bit higher, I want to see that data, thank you. The latest 3 weeks of data, and you see the two storm events, which happen one right here and one right here, and you see what they do to the water quality. And what you notice here is that we have three types of data. We have yellow points. This is the standard laboratory. This is the most probable number method that I've shown you earlier. You have the green dots, which is the planktonic count. This is our alert measurement, measuring samples that were filtered at 5 microns. And then we have the red points, which is the alert technology measuring the comprehensive count. And
which one do they use for which one did they give us today?
They
said 500-600.
That was the most probable number method. And as you can see, if you go further down, if you look on this on a log scale, you can actually see better what's happening. And you see that this lab count is most of the time really close to the planktonic count. And this is because, I remind you, the lab sees the pedestrians and then counts every car as one. So it sees a little bit of the comprehensive charge, but it's highly underestimated because every car and bus are counted as one. So that's why these are usually a little bit above, but of course, with the uncertainty in the measurement, sometimes they are below, sometimes they are above. But they basically track our planktonic count. But you see that the comprehensive count is actually quite high. And there are days where the comprehensive count is below this limit. But today and yesterday, actually, this is data from yesterday, the comprehensive count was, was at about 3,000, so it was significantly higher. So we don't really know what the risk was. So what I'd like to invite you now is to take a look together at the data that just came in from this morning. We're building these curves point by point. Remember these fluorescence curves, and now we're going to look at it live. And live to the extent that that I can connect. Okay, well, looks like our Wi-Fi has dropped down conveniently. But I promise you we're going to see the data. Okay, so we'll try again. Okay. So looks like maybe things have. Okay, there we go. Perfect. So what we're going to look at here are this measurement, and you see that this is filtered Seine Alexander 3 and unfiltered Seine Alexander 3. So this is planktonic count, and this is comprehensive count, measurements taken this morning. And I am going to show you that data right here. So this is right here, this is the filtered Seine measurement. And if we scroll down, so you see this is a curve, it's still in progress. So we just got this kink in the fluorescence which allows us to quantify. And what we quantified for this morning is 867 E. coli per 100 ml. This is a planktonic count, right? So let's take a look now at cell number 2 in there, which does measure the comprehensive count. And what we see, if we go down, we see this detection actually comes a little bit earlier. So, you know, this is actually a little bit of noise because this system, as you can imagine, it was transported in the metro from the sampling site to here. So there is a little bit of that shaking up. But the signal is very clear, and we measure 1,500 E. coli per 100 ml comprehensive count. So we are in the same situation as we were yesterday, meaning we measure a planktonic bacterial charge that is below the limit and a comprehensive charge that is significantly above. So we don't know what the risk is. And usually the laboratory measurement, which is going to be available tomorrow morning, is between these two values. So there's a very good chance that it might be above the 1,000. So it is an interesting situation. This is new science. We're stepping into unknown territory, but we make the statement we're making here is that the current methods are actually unsuitable for waters that contain large amounts and variable amounts of E. coli that are aggregated onto particles. And in urban rivers, this is often the case. So we need a new method. We need a new methodology to be able to measure this. And we are trying to provide that. We've been working on this for several years. And just today, we published the science paper that is the basis of what we've been doing and what we've been seeing. So it's out for public review. It's out for scrutiny by experts. And we are really excited to be able to contribute to water science in this way and to be able to contribute to the safety of the 2024 Olympics. And before ending, I would like to really congratulate the City of Paris and the Olympic Committee for organizing an amazing event in very difficult conditions. We have rain, like I said, the biggest 2 rain events from this season just happened in the past 3 weeks. This is significant. And nevertheless, you know, with some caveats which are not anybody's fault because this is breaking new science. They organized the event, the lab measurements were good, and this is the important thing. Our planktonic measurements and our lab measurements showed the same thing. Those values were below, but we have this comprehensive count that we don't know yet exactly how to look at it. It is something new, and it is something that is there, and it is significant. With this, I'd like to open the session for questions. Thank you very much for your attention, and we can move on to the question session.
I have a question.
Yes, Jeff, please.
What I would like to know is, you say the current methodology, presumably the methodology that the city is using is unsuitable and potentially dangerous because of the results that might not be apt. And you said that the athletes, this could actually create some harm to the athletes because you don't exactly know what they're facing because you can't get an accurate picture of the threshold. So what I would like to know is, do you think that in the current case of the triathlon, which just happened, because the results, the tests were taken Tuesday morning, Their tests were taken Tuesday morning, and then there was rainfall, as you pointed out. What risk, if any, did the triathlon athletes face that we may not know about?
Well, I mean, I would say based on our data, which provides additional insight compared to the laboratory data, they faced about the same level of risk as the previous day when the measurement done by the city of Paris and by the Olympic Committee was made and on which the decision was based. We do not see a major effect of the rain that came in the meantime on water quality between yesterday and today. It could be that tomorrow water quality will break down, and tomorrow we will see the effect because we'll have pollution that also comes from upstream. But today we don't see that effect. So I don't think there was an additional risk. But the risk that is there comes from these particles that contain pathogens and bacteria and that are just not counted and invisible to the current standard methods. And we don't know what that risk was because all the epidemiology studies were done 20 and 30 years ago based on the same laboratory methods which do not see those aggregates. So we're stepping into unknown territory here, and the risk is really unknown. But we think that the risk from aggregates is significantly more important than from free bacteria because the aggregates actually protect the content. These are, imagine it as fecal matter that has broken down to, micron size and not yet dispersed completely. So it does contain all that's in that matter. And we see that also from the human markers that we measure using DNA analysis, right? So that is a fully independent method that confirms what we're seeing. The human markers are clearly showing the same thing. Yes, we have a lot more of these human markers in the complete sample versus what we call the planktonic sample, the filtered sample.
So have you shared your findings with the authorities, and how do they view them?
We have shared them almost a year ago. This is where we have discovered this, and we have started doing a full scientific study around it. And, well, the response was a little bit disappointing. They didn't want to know about it, and they said that, well, they will use the standard methods, which are the regulations today. And no one is to blame. If I were a manager in a public function in charge of water quality, I would definitely go with what the current regulations are. This is the safest way to manage water.
Just on the comprehensive numbers, you say the threshold might be higher, might not be 1,000. So
But
at this stage, we don't know.
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying. We don't really know what the real risk is. This requires epidemiological studies that are done, with people bathing in different conditions and then looking what is the percentage of them getting sick. This is something that takes years. All we're doing here, we're pointing out to the fact that, like in that story, the emperor is naked. We have a lot of bacteria that we cannot see with the standard methods and which carry a risk that is unknown. And this was something that was not known and is not even known by many of the microbiology experts today. Or if it is known, it's sort of conveniently pushed under the carpet because they don't have a way to answer the question, what is the real risk? But we can measure that amount, and this can form the basis of a better epidemiology that will cover also the risk coming from these particles.
But if you give the safety information for La Villette, you said, so what's the agreement there? Which data are you looking at?
We're looking there, or we're actually looking at the comprehensive count, and the water at La Villette is coming from a canal. It's not the Seine water, and it is a lot cleaner. It's not
the threshold is higher?
No, it is the same.
still
We use actually the city uses a different set of thresholds for that, and this is their management strategy. But the data we provide is a comprehensive count for those, and usually the values we obtain are in the tens, not in the thousands. So water is much cleaner.
Dan,
Yes, Stephanie.
With your expertise, do you think they should have gone ahead with the triathlon this morning?
This is a good question. I really don't, I wish I weren't in the shoes of the people that had to make that decision. You have these athletes that have trained basically their whole life for this event, for this moment. And it is, it is the first time it is done in an urban river. It is really an Olympics that is different from all the others up to now. I think it's a special moment in history today, and I think that, it would have been unfair to not allow the triathlon competition to proceed. Maybe, you may ask, maybe it could have been postponed by several days, or, based on the data they had, they made the right decision, except that they didn't have all the data, and they didn't have the most relevant data. So I think that the decision based on that and in that framework was correct. And I think that the triathlon athletes probably have had a blast and have enjoyed it, and we were really excited to see the race. I guess we will see in the next days if there are people getting sick or not, and maybe this would be the beginning of a new epidemiology study.
Should they have maybe been more cautious about their?
They cannot be more cautious. I mean, they're competing. This is a competition for, they have to give everything. And it's normal during these competitions that they drink some of the water. It's just part of they all know it, and they're all aware of this. And let's not forget, all the previous triathlon competitions in the history have been done using the same thresholds and using the same methods. What we're seeing now is really new science, which says, well, maybe there is a problem. And there have been triathlons in the UK last year where hundreds of people got sick. So it is a real issue, and it's clear that the current regulatory framework is breaking down because it cannot protect these athletes from getting sick today. So this is why we're pushing and we're advocating for new technology that is faster and that actually provides a much, much better measurement of risk. Yes,
Okay,
please.
if with the climate change we're going to see more and more exceptional weather events, does that mean logically that it's going to get harder and harder to monitor water quality? And a second question, if I may, this suspense that we've had in the last few days about the triathlon, do you think in a broader sense that could possibly highlight the issue and maybe help, encourage authorities and cities to take better care of their water and monitor better what's going on?
Very good question. We just got news a couple of days ago of a study that was just published in Science, which is measuring the variability of the precipitation in the world and how much, random rain events that cannot really be predicted well, how much more they're happening. And we see a big increase in those in Europe and in the eastern side of the eastern coast of the United States and in other places. So yes, variability due to climate change is a major issue, and this will only make things more difficult, as you correctly anticipate. So monitoring is going to become critical. Having technology that's able to monitor the right risk, measure the actual risk coming from all the bacteria, and provide results fast is going to be extremely important. And of course, not only fast, but accurate.
And sorry, just the sort of suspense we've had in the last few days, do you think that that's going to, do you think we'll see a push towards more countries, more cities trying to make these efforts to clean up their water as a result?
Yes, I think so, and we already see that quite a bit. We see a big movement in the UK where, a lot of, actually, this instrument is used by a lot of citizen scientists and NGOs in the UK to actually measure different rivers and to actually understand the water quality, just because the data provided by the authorities is so scarce. And then often it's the water utilities themselves that measure, so, people are, well, you measure, you pollute, and you measure, you're not sure. So having technology and having the means to do measurements is essential. And for the first time in history, this device makes citizen science and makes simple measurements possible because you don't need the lab anymore. You can actually measure water quality without having access to a lab and measure it quickly and right where you're interested in it.
Ken,
Yes, Jeff?
there are several thresholds that are being considered acceptable today, as you just pointed out. The World Triathlon, the US EPA, the WHO. I mean, in the real world and in what we're looking at, how safe are athletes, how safe are the athletes when they're swimming in waters where these organizations are doing these tests, and in your view, they meet a standard that now we have, you're working on technology that actually gives, or should give a more precise picture. I mean, what kind of risks are they facing, and how real are these risks?
Well, you managed to pack about 5 questions in one. Congratulations for that. So the first question, or implied question, yes, there are many standards. You have the US EPA, which is at 126 E. coli per 100 ml on a geometric average of multiple samples. So the European bathing water regulations, they have a limit at 900, which is over 4 years, and again, a geometric mean and 95% confidence interval. So, I mean, you know, all of these numbers are attached to statistics on how to use them. And usually these statistics are for many samples. So they only allow you to look retrospectively at how the water quality has been over several months and say, oh, you know, maybe we shouldn't be swimming here now after all these years. So it doesn't allow you to say, oh, today I'm measuring it and then I'm jumping in because I know it's good. So, and you know, we've been working with the WHO. They have actually tested these instruments, and they issued a report, and there is a full, I mean, we've worked with the WHO for 2 years on this. And this is a subject that is essential because, you know, the WHO is concerned not just with people swimming, it is concerned with people drinking the water. And there, you know, you have 1 million kids every year that die from diarrhea and other diseases that come from drinking contaminated water. And there, this issue of, oh, is 1 E. coli, you never have 0 E. coli, but is 1 E. coli just 1 E. coli, so the risk is relatively low? Or is it a fecal particle that has 1,000 E. coli and cholera virus and all of these other things that will actually really kill you if you drink it? And this is where we're getting. This is where being able to actually correctly measure these bacteria is essential, because in some cases, the risk that you're not seeing with the standard methods could be a matter of life and death. In the case of the athletes, now to come to the last question, I don't think they, from what we're seeing, probably they didn't take a much bigger risk. And they're used to this, and they've swam in waters like this. They have, you know, young bodies that are at the peak of their metabolism, and they probably take some medication to protect them before and after. So probably nothing will happen in terms of health problems, and I really hope so for the athletes. But what we're seeing is that what we're pointing with our finger is the fact that the way that these measurements are done today are completely inadequate,
Accepting that, though, if you were to just take a step back into the layman's world of people who don't study this, people who are not scientists or epidemiologists, but are looking at athletes jumping into the Seine, gee, would I want to do that?
Oh, I want to do that too. Right. Trust me. That's...
I mean, concretely speaking, assuming that the levels were much higher than they actually found out using the methodology that they have, what kind of risks, concrete risks, are they actually facing? I mean, how bad is this?
Well, this gets into the area of epidemiology, which is not necessarily my area of expertise. But there are experts, and I've read the seminal papers on this, and these studies have been done. One study, which is extremely important, which was done by the United States EPA, they use a very different method. They use also a method that's able to measure comprehensive counts, because they measure DNA. They measure DNA of Enterococci and DNA of E. coli. And what they found out is that the standard culture-based method underestimate the risk compared to the DNA-based methods, especially at the lower count. So the comprehensive count, you know, now this is coming from a completely different direction. We're looking at DNA, which is not what we're doing in these measurements here. But they show the same thing. The comprehensive count is really much better correlated with the actual risk. So telling you, oh, you know, the risk is 30% to get diarrhea versus 20% to get diarrhea, you cannot say that. No,
I mean, what can they suffer from if in fact the E. coli is of a level that is beyond the threshold? What kind of
well, it goes from really mild things, which could be diarrhea and, you know, maybe a skin rash, And it could be as bad as getting an antibiotic-resistant form of E. coli that develops inside your body. And you know, those are very few still for now, but they're more and more in wastewater. We find them more and more. So you know, the more E. coli you have, the more are the chances that you may catch one of these really bad ones that could actually get you really sick. It could give you an infection that you cannot treat easily, and that can lead eventually to death. Of course, these are extremely rare cases, but then remember, it's a lot more in the water than E. coli. There are thousands of pathogens out there. E. coli is an indicator only. So it's associated with presence of sewage, and that's why it's being used. It's not necessarily the E. coli that we're measuring that have the risk. But when we have these aggregates, we know that there is other stuff in these aggregates, and that's where the risk is. But it's very difficult to tell. This requires studies. This requires whole university. We're ready to collaborate with the world scientists on this. We think it is a major issue, and I think we can correct it. But it requires science. It requires epidemiology. It requires medical research. It requires a lot more than what we're doing. But we're providing the technology so this new water science can be developed.
And you said that you offered this new technology to the city, and they decided to stick with the more conventional approach because that's what the organizations are also gearing their, I mean, it's interlocking with what the World Health Organizations are actually using. Is that essentially what you said?
Well, the World Health Organization is starting more and more to look at other methods because these are not really, they cannot be applied in where they're needed most. That's why this instrument, we developed it at the WHO's request and UNICEF request because they wanted to have an instrument that can be used in remote places where you don't have any lab nearby. So it is really significant, and they recognize the importance of this. It's unfortunately, regulations are things that change every 20 or 30 years. You know, these are set by laws. These need to be voted on, and these need to go through. I mean, it's a very, this vehicle has a lot of inertia, so it will take time for it to change. But it's extremely important to raise a hand and say, guys, you're doing something wrong here, and this is major, and this is what we're doing today.
But just in the comprehensive test that you're talking about with respect to the triathlon that took place today, so the test that you've shown us so far did not indicate that it would have been dramatically more hazardous, if at all, to what the city had based their judgment on.
Well, we have shown that the levels were actually 3 times higher than the World Triathlon limit, and possibly more. In some cases, they're 10 times higher, based on the data that I've shown here. I mean, what you see here.
I was talking about, yesterday's
Same thing. I mean, this is yesterday's data, right? Right here we have the difference between 860 and about, well, let me remember the exact number from yesterday, but this is, okay, there. You know, so this is missing that I think no, it has yesterday's data right here. So we measure 867 versus 3,444. Well, you tell me if that's significant or not. I don't know. I think it is, but it's really a matter for epidemiologists here.
What's the acceptable threshold?
1,000. It's difficult to judge like this. This is really needs to be looked at scientifically. It's not by saying a number, and this is one of the errors that the labs are doing. They're issuing one number, but really you need to look at this. You need to look what's the confidence interval on that number. Is it? I mean, what's a real probability that given that I measured this number today, water quality is really that bad? Could it be better? And I measured this just because, you know, my confidence interval. So that's why we're doing multiple measurements a day. That allows us to reduce these confidence intervals, to get confidence in our data. And our data is very reproducible. So we see the same thing on every sample we analyze in the river on one day. So these things are real, and they are reproducible, and they are significant. Are there any other questions, please?
Just, were we able to get some of those photos? The ones of you guys this morning testing?
Yes, I would like to ask you to please send a request by email, and I'll email you the photo and also with a release so you can use it. Yeah.
So, Rafael from maybe just to sum it up, what's the message out there to the fans and the athletes with regards to your findings compared to what?
Compete to your max and watch the science, because this science is still in development.
So if you are in a position to decide on the triathlon today, what would have been the decision?
I'm not going to answer that question because I'm not in that position. This is for the authorities to answer. And like I said, we are in a gray zone. I'm not qualified to, this requires a new epidemiological study that will say how significant this is. But it is significant. And, based on the data we measured today, this high value has dropped down. Now it's only 1,500. So the water is safer for tomorrow based on the data from today than it was, today based on the data from yesterday. So I would say, if they opened it today, probably they can open it tomorrow just as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're available, and we have drinks, and we have fruit, and we have some cookies there. So let's enjoy.
Taking that out, yeah? Hold on.
So what you're going to see is a yellow liquid, and this is because and it's also fluorescent. This is because this liquid contains two different enzymatic substrates, one which changes color due to the presence of coliforms, and that turns the sample yellow, and the other one that becomes fluorescent due to the presence of E. coli. So the sample before we start the measurement is transparent like this, and then at the end of a measurement it looks like that. Also actually like this. Okay.
Wait, can you hold it? Sorry, you said this what? This is...
After it was sampled.
No, this is after it's been analyzed, and the color does not come from the sample, it comes from the biochemical reaction that happens within the sample. This is
the reagent.
Exactly. This color is what we monitor, and this is what allows us to quantify the bacteria in there.
Right. So if the color changes more, it means it's more polluted?
Rather, if this color appears sooner, it means that it is more polluted.
Donc aujourd'hui, ce sont des résultats qui montrent clairement qu'aujourd'hui, les risques mesurés par les laboratoires avec les méthodes standards sont sous-estimés puisqu'ils ne sont pas capables de mesurer les bactéries qui sont agrégées sur des particules qui peuvent être d'origine fécale ou sédimentaire. Mais les méthodes actuelles ne sont pas capables de mesurer la quantité de ces bactéries qui sont groupées ensemble sur les grosses particules. Ce que nous voyons aujourd'hui, c'est que dans la Seine, et surtout pendant des périodes pluvieuses comme celles que nous traversons, nous voyons une quantité très importante de bactéries qui sont attachées à ces particules, hein, et qui sont aujourd'hui, donc qui créent un risque qui n'est pas vraiment connu puisque ces bactéries ne pouvaient pas être mesurées avant avec les méthodes standards. Donc, elles ne faisaient pas partie des études épidémiologiques qui ont été réalisées. Donc, on est dans un nouveau territoire, hein, où nous mesurons et nous voyons la présence de quantités très importantes de bactéries sur particules et agrégées, mais qui sont invisibles aujourd'hui en méthode réglementaire.
Could you go back shortly about the risks on the athletes you were...
Donc, en termes de risque, on n'est pas vraiment sûr de ce que ça veut dire. Ce qui est sûr, c'est que ces particules, surtout si elles sont d'origine fécale, elles ne contiennent pas juste les Escherichia coli qu'on mesure, hein, mais contiennent aussi des pathogènes, d'autres pathogènes qui peuvent être beaucoup plus dangereux et qui, en plus, sont protégés à l'intérieur de ces agrégats ou de ces particules. Donc, ils peuvent aller plus loin. Elles ne sont pas exposées aux radiations UV, donc ces bactéries sont beaucoup plus résistantes, ce qui veut dire qu'elles peuvent provoquer un risque supplémentaire à la santé des athlètes, voire des baigneurs, etc. Mais on ne peut pas dire exactement quel est ce risque parce que cela nécessite des études d'épidémiologie principalement. Et c'est quelque chose qui dure des années pour obtenir ce type de données. Mais ce qu'on dit aujourd'hui, c'est que, attention, il y a des choses que les méthodes standards ne voient pas. Attention, ces méthodes ne sont pas applicables dans les cas des eaux de Seine où cette charge sur bactéries peut être extrêmement variable d'un jour, cette charge sur particules, excusez-moi, peut être extrêmement variable d'un jour à l'autre. Donc, on ne peut pas faire... on ne peut pas l'estimer sur la base des méthodes actuelles.
Sur les résultats que vous avez faits, les mesures que vous avez faites, sur les épreuves d'hier ou d'aujourd'hui, c'était quoi? C'était suffisant pour se baigner ou c'était dangereux selon vous?
Si on mesure que les bactéries libres, donc notamment si on mesure que les bactéries libres ou les bactéries planctoniques, comme on dit, donc ce sont les bactéries qui sont individuelles comme ça dans l'eau, la qualité de l'eau était juste en dessous du seuil du triathlon. Donc on a mesuré autour de 868 bactéries par 100 ml. C'est la même chose qu'on a mesuré hier en termes de planctonique. Donc ce niveau n'a pas beaucoup changé ces jours-là. On est en dessous de ce seuil. Mais quand on mesure la charge totale de bactéries qui comprend aussi les bactéries qui sont attachées à des particules fécales, voire sédimentaires, on obtient une valeur qui est plus élevée. Donc on a une mesure qui est arrivée pour l'instant qui montre cette charge à 1500, donc 2 fois plus que la charge qui est libre qu'on mesure avec les méthodes ordinaires. On a d'autres mesures qui sont en cours et on aura les résultats dans les prochaines heures, donc on pourra être encore plus précis bientôt. Merci.
Vous avez parlé avec les autorités, avec la mairie de Paris sur vos méthodes à vous? Est-ce que vous travaillez avec la mairie de Paris ou est-ce qu'ils gardent
Nous avons travaillé pendant des années avec la mairie de Paris. On continue à travailler avec la mairie de Paris dans le cadre de la surveillance de la baignade à la Villette. Et oui, nous avons attentionné les personnes en charge de la qualité de l'eau à la mairie de Paris de notre découverte. Et la décision a été de suivre quand même les méthodes réglementaires actuelles, malgré le fait qu'il est possiblement un risque supplémentaire qui n'est pas vraiment mesuré par ces méthodes.
Aujourd'hui, votre conférence de presse, c'est pour dire attention, il y a un danger à se baigner dans la Seine. C'est le but de votre conférence de presse aujourd'hui?
C'est en partie le but de la conférence de presse, en partie c'est aussi pour dire que la surveillance de la qualité de l'eau, elle est essentielle si on veut pouvoir ouvrir les zones de baignade et que les méthodes actuelles ne répondent pas complètement à la mesure du risque, surtout dans les eaux urbaines et dans les rivières comme la Seine, où on a beaucoup de sédiments, on a beaucoup de rejets d'eau usée qui peuvent arriver en amont ou dans la ville, beaucoup moins maintenant dans la ville avec l'infrastructure du bassin d'Austerlitz, mais quand même dans ce type de contexte, on voit que les méthodes actuelles ne sont pas adaptées. Donc, il faut faire de la surveillance accrue avec des méthodes qui sont capables de mesurer toutes les bactéries. Il faut développer des limites épidémiologiques qui limitent le risque sur la base de ces nouvelles mesures qui mesurent toutes les bactéries dans l'échantillon. Merci beaucoup.
Et pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas Fluidion, si vous deviez résumer ce que c'est, comment c'est financé
Tout à fait. Donc nous sommes une entreprise privée française. Nous avons également une entreprise à Los Angeles pour le marché américain, Fluidion US. Et notre technologie, c'est une technologie deep tech. Donc on développe vraiment de nouvelles méthodes scientifiques et on développe toute l'instrumentation autour de ces méthodes et tous les systèmes pour pouvoir interactionner avec ces instruments, pour pouvoir avoir les données à la portée de la main et pour pouvoir avoir un système complet de mesures et de surveillance du risque lié à la qualité de l'eau.
Juste une dernière question pour revenir sur les résultats de ces derniers jours, notamment avec les épreuves qui avaient lieu. Vous dites que c'était dangereux de se baigner pour les athlètes?
Aujourd'hui, sur les mesures que nous avons faites, les mesures de bactéries planctoniques, elles étaient juste en dessous du seuil autorisé par le triathlon. Donc sur cette base et aussi sur la base des mesures de laboratoire que nous avons réalisées en parallèle et sur la base des réglementations actuelles, non. Donc on était dans les conditions où la baignade serait autorisée sur la base de ces réglementations. Par contre, nous, ce qu'on dit, c'est que ces réglementations ne prennent pas en compte toutes les bactéries qui existent, et notamment, il peut y avoir des charges très importantes de bactéries qui sont complètement invisibles aux méthodes actuelles et qui posent certainement un risque supplémentaire qui n'est pas mesuré aujourd'hui. Donc, il faut développer les méthodes et il faut développer les études épidémiologiques pour mieux comprendre ce risque qui est majeur. Merci. Absolutely. I think it's essential to have a very clear presentation of this. We also published this paper today, so it's out for sale. You have the QR code No, I don't want to. Thank you so much.
Yes. Andrea, tell me when you're ready. But the free-floating laboratories currently?
Not really. The laboratories measure those bacteria, but not bacteria.
Okay. And you counted the plankton?
This is, the planktonic count is just those 3 bacteria.
Okay. And then there's the comprehensive count.
Exactly. So the laboratory count normally should be located between the planktonic count and the comprehensive count. If the 5,000.
Your new methodology